Love in Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire can be a wild ride. As Geer Mormont said, "The things we love destroy us every time, lad. Remember that." And we've seen love absolutely tear down a person or realm. Lyanna and Rhaegar, Robert and Cersei, Aegon V's children refusing to honor their marriage agreements. Love has led to war in this series. Murder, infidelity, betrayal. But George has written some couples that have such a deep love, such as Jaehaerys I and his wife, that despite how it ended, it was still beautiful. This video, I want to talk about what I think is one of the greatest marriages in A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones. Catelyn Tully and Ned Stark. A marriage that was built on mutual trust and respect and grew into one of the best marriages in the books. Most of us know the story, but for those of you that don't, this is how Ned and Catelyn came to be married. Catelyn Tully was originally betrothed to Ned Stark's older brother, Brandon. When Rhaegar supposedly abducted Lyanna, Ned and Brandon's sister, and Brandon went to King's Landing to make the prince pay for what he did, he was killed by the Mad King. From there, the Mad King ordered Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon to be turned over to him, but Jon Arryn refused, and Robert's rebellion began. To strengthen their forces and bind Lord Tully to their side, Ned Stark wed Catelyn Tully, and Jon Arryn wed Lysa Tully in a double wedding. At the wedding, Ned and Catelyn were complete strangers. They had no reason to love each other or even like each other. It was purely a marriage of convenience, and Catelyn was more of a chess piece to win a war, which in their society wasn't anything too shocking. After the war, Ned and Catelyn settled into their life as Lord and Lady Stark of Winterfell and went about raising a family. In the books, we can clearly see how much they loved and cared for each other. There are many, many passages to draw from. We have Ned after being taken to the dungeons for treason. He wanted to drift off into a dreamless sleep in his own bed, with his arms wrapped tight around his lady, Catelyn. And then, when he woke, there was nothing to do but think, and his waking thoughts were worse than nightmares. The thought of Cat was as painful as a bed of nettles. He wondered where she was, what she was doing. He wondered whether he would ever see her again. We also have several quotes by Catelyn after Ned is executed, with her somehow getting across their great love, but at the same time, kinda making you want to sob. Catelyn had not eaten today. Perhaps that had been unwise. She told herself that there had been no time, but the truth was that food had lost its savor in a world without Ned. When they took his head off, they killed me too. Then of course her thoughts during the Red Wedding. They could do as they liked with her, imprison her, rape her, kill her. It made no matter. She had lived too long, and Ned was waiting. And then of course, not my hair. Ned loves my hair. So it's hard to not come to the conclusion that Ned and Catelyn loved each other. George is an amazing writer that puts no doubts in our mind that even though there was zero love between the pair when they wed, by the time of their deaths, they were incredibly in love with each other. But what do experts say about their marriage? It is one thing for me to say they had one of the best marriages in the series, but do psychologists agree? To see how great it was, let's look at John Gottman, a marriage researcher and clinical psychologist, the 7 principles for making marriage work. These 7 principles are supposed to demonstrate if a marriage is healthy and will be long-lasting and satisfying. The 7 principles are: enhance your love maps, nurture your fondness and admiration, turn towards each other instead of away, let your partner influence you, solve your solvable problems, overcome gridlock, and create shared meaning. And to nip this in the bud, though I know 99% of my subs don't need to be told this, but there are going to be some that are going to be set off complaining we can't judge our notions of a happy marriage or relationship to theirs due to the extreme differences between our worlds. Despite A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones being in a different time and culture than our world and a different world entirely, psychologists still agree the 7 principles can be used to determine happiness and healthiness of a marriage in their world. If you think these principles can't be assigned to their world, that is perfectly okay, but I will continue to trust in the doctors I've discussed these topics with extensively. So let's go through each principle and see how Ned and Cat stacked up, and if they really did have one of the best marriages in A Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones. Number 1. Enhance your love maps. This is basically saying the more you know your partner or are familiar with them and know the little things, the more intimacy there will be and you will build a strong foundation. Knowing your partner's values, hopes, worries, and goals are important to make this love map. He argues that you need this love map to truly know your partner, and without it, you don't really know that person, so you can't truly love them. Catelyn and Ned are definitely not some fling. They didn't catch each other's eye at attorney or begin some whirlwind romance. They didn't decide to get married because they couldn't keep their hands off of each other. Or like in Sansa's case, not because she loved the idea of being a queen and marrying a prince than actually knowing the person he was. Joffrey also definitely couldn't give a piss about the little things that made Sansa who she was. So unlike others, Ned and Kat's love developed over the years as they learned about each other. As Catelyn says,
love didn't just happen to us. We built it slowly over the years, stone by stone. For you, for your brothers and sisters, for all of us.
And we saw over and over again in the first book that they both knew the little things about each other. Ned knows and acknowledges Catelyn's uncomfortable feelings about the Godswood, so he knows when she goes there to speak with him, it's important. Catelyn knows his rituals. She has learned through her experiences with Ned and getting to know him about his relationships and how to break bad news to him, when to push and when to step back. While Ned may keep one big secret from her, this isn't really a blemish on their marriage or love, but simply Ned's honor in keeping a promise. Besides that, they have a level of trust and confide in each other to a degree we don't see many others display in this series. So they obviously work on their love map. Check to number 1. Next, nurture your fondness and admiration. Gottman states that admiration and fondness are the two most important elements for a long-lasting and satisfying relationship. If you don't feel your partner is worth love, respect, and honor despite their flaws or things that may upset you about them, your relationship is doomed. In fact, he went so far as to say 94% of the time, when a couple puts a positive spin on their marriage history, they have a happy future together. We see this with Ned and Catelyn. They didn't have the most romantic reasons for getting married. It would be easy for Catelyn to moan and piss she was meant to marry the, arguably, more handsome and desirable Stark, Brandon. But instead she had to settle for Ned Stark, the quiet wolf, the one that didn't really make waves or have maidens throwing their virginity at him like Brandon. We could have seen a similar result as with Robert Baratheon. He never got married to his betrothed, Lyanna, due to her death, and so he poisoned any relationship he had afterwards, making his marriage to Cersei incredibly toxic. But Catelyn doesn't do that. She respects and honors Ned and treats him as her number 1 choice. Yeah, Ned has gotten a bit mopey and declared that Catelyn was meant for Brandon, but that wasn't to diminish her or show any lack of fondness for her. But more Ned putting down himself and how he wasn't the right man to become Lord of Winterfell, his brother was. If I can bring up Sansa again, she was actually incredibly lucky to be married to Tyrion, as brief as their time together as husband and wife was. Despite the circumstances of their marriage, she's a hostage of the Lannisters and being used to make sure they get control of the North, Tyrion is still fond of her and honors her, something he wasn't expected or required to do. In that way, Sansa got to experience a bit of the relationship her parents had. And let's not even get started on Jaime and Cersei. The more Jaime grows as a person, the more Cersei seems to despise him. And it's not like Jaime is always the nicest guy with her either. Ned also shows fondness for Catelyn by thinking of her before himself. When Jon Arryn dies, Ned's father figure, she notes that he thinks of her first and wants to send her away to help her sister Lysa, telling Catelyn to not leave her sister alone in grief, even though she would then be leaving Ned alone in his. In the same chapter, Catelyn forces herself to smile for Ned's sake at the news that Robert Baratheon is coming. She knows her husband is hurting, and even though she fears what Robert coming could mean, she knows that her husband's happiness is more important than her own fears at that moment. Which ties into number 3. So for number 2, Catelyn and Ned get another check. So let's move on to 3. Turn towards each other instead of away. Some people believe that the best couples and marriages are those that don't fight. However, some of the scariest sentences psychologists and marriage counselors can hear are, "Oh, we never fight." Fighting is healthy, and most studies have concluded in general, happy couples don't fight less than other couples. The difference is how they fight and how they repair their relationship after disagreements. There is a term, emotional bank account. This bank account is filled when couples turn towards each other instead of away, and is a sign of a happy marriage. This bank account softens the times when a couple disagrees or is disappointed in the other. Catelyn and Ned fought. They had disagreements. Both had their tempers too, as we see in the very beginning of the first book. Cat wants Ned to be Hand of the King, and Ned doesn't, at least at first. Catelyn, through her years of experience with him, knows how to talk to him, though some might say manipulate him, without going for the throat too much. Yet their love for each other is always there. The positive, their emotional bank account of when they relied on each other, gets them through the tough parts of their marriage and this fight. It would be easy for Ned to put his foot down and say he is the Lord of Winterfell and her husband, and that he has the final say. But because they turn towards each other instead of away, due to that emotional bank account, they work through it together. This results in their marriage having even more positives to draw on. And psychologists appear to agree that Ned and Catelyn's positives in their marriage far outweigh the negatives. Cersei and Jaime utterly fail at this. Not that they're a beacon of great relationships in the first place. Cersei plenty of times turns away from Jaime instead of turning towards him. So again, Catelyn and Ned get a check mark. Let's go to number 4. Let your partner influence you. This one tells us that it's so important to listen to your partner's feelings and opinions and let them influence you. This doesn't mean they dominate you or you're giving them complete control, but that for a happy marriage, you need to respect your partner's feelings, views, and desires. There is an emotional intelligence when you know how and when to yield to your partner. If you can't consider your partner's perspective or feelings, and you can't make decisions together and search out common ground, your marriage is likely going to be very unhappy. Catelyn clearly knows when to back off, such as when she's pressing Ned to know about the mother of his bastard child, Jon. In the books, Ned did not want to go south, but he listened to Catelyn's reasoning and allowed her to influence him and push him to go. When Catelyn wants him to stay after Bran's fall, Ned is able to influence her to allow him to go. In the show, it is the opposite, with Catelyn upset he's going, but he also listens to her, and though he decides on honor and duty over her, he makes it clear that he still respects her. Ned does not resist sharing power with his wife, and he includes her in his decision-making. This is unique, as men in their world don't need to ask their wives to do anything, like I talked about in a previous number. Yet Ned still chooses to do so, making their closeness and marriage even stronger. Which is smart of Ned, as it's been shown that when you make a woman feel like her opinions and feelings matter, she's more likely to give in to the man's desire or decisions and be far less negative. So that's another check for Ned and Catelyn. Number 5, solve your solvable problems. This psychologist actually divided marital problems into 2 categories, though you'll hear plenty of arguments that there are better ways to categorize them. But for Gottman, there were perpetual problems that can't be resolved and conflicts that can be resolved. And he created a 5-step model to solve solvable conflicts. Soften the startup by not beginning with criticism. Make and receive repair attempts or action and words that take away the tension. Soothe yourself and then your partner. Meaning make sure you are calm enough to discuss the problem without shutting down. Compromise, so finding common ground. And show tolerance of each other's faults, because if you can't accept your partner's flaws, you'll never be able to compromise. Ned and Catelyn, even when furiously disagreeing with each other, have enough fondness and respect for each other that they are able to fix their solvable problems. Take their different religions. Ned respects that Catelyn follows the faith of the Seven, not the Northerners' old gods. We learn in the first book that Ned, for her sake, built a small sept where she could sing to the 7 faces of her god, despite the Starks and the North believing in the old gods. He listened to Catelyn's feelings and opinions, and allowed that to influence him to build a sept for her, even though he doesn't give up his own gods. Catelyn equally allows him to keep his faith, even though the old gods kind of freak her out and she doesn't like the godswood, the center of the Starks' religion. They were able to solve a problem that could have affected their entire marriage and been a constant strain had Ned refused to let her worship her gods. Now, on the perpetual problem side, I feel like we all know the one major issue in their marriage that they just couldn't solve, or at least solve how Cat wanted. Jon Snow, Ned's supposed bastard, getting the hell out of there. So we know when Catelyn came to Winterfell with baby Robb after the end of Robert's rebellion to find her brand new husband had settled back home with a bastard boy, it kinda set her off. He was a constant reminder of Ned's infidelity, and Catelyn just couldn't understand why Ned kept around that reminder, when most lords would have taken care of the child, but also kept him out of the sight of their wife. She especially doesn't understand his choice when she has expressed his presence hurts her. In fact, when Catelyn questions Ned about Jon's mother, it is the only time Ned frightens her, and he demands that she drops any further questions about Jon's mother. Which, yeah, is stonewalling, but there's a reason I didn't include this as a negative in number 3. Despite Ned telling her to never bring up Jon's mother again, Catelyn isn't shy about letting Ned, or Jon, know she hates the kid. She is downright brutal in how she treats Jon. But Ned and Catelyn have come up with a compromise on this, though that compromise still mentally wrecks Jon. Catelyn can complain. She can bitch all she wants about Jon to Ned, but Catelyn understands that Ned will not send Jon away and that he is his son. Ned still holds on to hope that Catelyn will one day accept Jon, and Catelyn still holds on to hope that Jon will one day just go away. Despite this huge thorn in their marriage, both can move past it and still love each other. Again, though, poor Jon. Which actually brings us to number 6, overcome gridlock. Gottman really speaks of the Jon issue in this one. He didn't believe solving major marital conflicts as the essential component to happy marriages, but that the majority of conflict in a marriage revolves around issues that are present throughout the entirety of the marriage. So perpetual. Sounds a lot like Ned keeping his bastard at Winterfell that has a constant negative impact on their marriage. In a happy marriage, the two partners want each other's dreams to come true. You want your partner to be happy and achieve the things they want. Gottman believed that when you reached a gridlock, it was because one of your dreams weren't being respected and or achieved. He also didn't believe that overcoming gridlock meant the problem was solved. The Jon problem isn't really solved in a way Catelyn would have hoped for, at least in the way of having her home free of Jon and also having Ned there as she pops out more babies. But gridlock is not overcome when you solve the problem, but you are able to have dialogue. Catelyn definitely has dialogue on her issue with Jon. Ned listens and at times lets her know she's gone a bit far, she needs to back down. The problem is never resolved, but they both feel free to have dialogue about their feelings on the subject and when they've pushed each other too far. She doesn't let Jon keep her from loving her husband or treating him with kindness, nor does Catelyn's hatred of Jon stop Ned from doing the same. There is a second constant issue between them according to Catelyn, but I don't necessarily agree with her. She claims that the shadow of Brandon still lays between them, but as mentioned before, this appears more to be Ned's uncertainty in his ability to lead, and not anything to do with their actual relationship. Though if you believe Ned was in love with another woman before their marriage, you could interpret this as a problem that remained. However, again, they kept dialogue open, and they're able to move past it. And this is perhaps one of my favorite quotes by Hurtley on Ned and Catelyn. In a world where duty and oaths are prioritized above marital satisfaction, Ned and Catelyn try their best to acknowledge the obstacles their marriage faces, and try their best not to allow those obstacles to be a wedge between them. In this way, we see that Catelyn and Ned do overcome gridlock. Finally, number 7, create shared meaning. Gottman believed that a healthy relationship has a legacy, the stories they tell, beliefs, and the culture they create to form a shared meaning. That a couple has shared meaning through the use of rituals, goals, roles, and symbols. We can very clearly see that Ned and Catelyn have shared rituals and roles. Catelyn and Ned have shared meaning in their children, their roles of being loving and nurturing parents, ruling the North, and honoring each other. Not only that, but Ned is super predictable to Catelyn in his rituals. She knows to find him in the God's Wood after an execution, where he cleanses himself. When Catelyn is in the God's Wood and says she's always felt like an outsider in this place devoted to the old gods, it is clear Ned doesn't feel the same. Catelyn follows the faith of the Seven, but Ned still shares his faith with her and believes that the old gods accept Catelyn, that their children are a shared symbol that clearly binds her not only to the old gods, but him and the North. Another ritual between them. She expects him to always ask about the children when he sees her, which is also part of their love map. As well, after they have sex, Catelyn knows that Ned will always roll off the bed and open the window to cool himself, since he hates being hot, which again goes with number 1. Lastly, let's take a look at Gottman's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that he claimed could determine if a couple would get a divorce with a 91% accuracy, even if we know Ned would never have left his wife. His 4 horsemen are criticism, so negative statements about your partner. That's a no, as we never really hear Kat or Ned talk poorly about each other. Next, contempt. This includes name-calling, rolling eyes, or mockery. Again, we don't really see that in their relationship. They definitely have a high level of respect for each other. Number 3 is defensiveness. This is blaming your partner. Catelyn doesn't even blame Ned for supposedly having an affair while they were married. She just understands it. She just doesn't like that he keeps his bastard around. Ned also lacks any defensiveness towards Catelyn, for the most part. Finally, number 4, stonewalling, where a person looks away without saying anything or pretends like they don't care what the other person is saying. While I'm sure those two may have had their fights, I doubt they engaged in this behavior much. Though we do know of an example when Ned did turn away from Catelyn during an argument, but she quickly realized she needed to soften her approach, and he didn't completely shut down. So we can see, even with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Ned and Catelyn come out with flying colors. So if we're going by Gottman, from everything we see, they have a great and healthy marriage. And if you've had the honor of sitting in on psychologists discussing the marriages of those in the world of Ice and Fire, they also tend to agree. So thanks for watching. This was the first video in my 14 Days of Love, where I make videos about love leading up to V-Day. Make sure you like and subscribe.